Great. So I'm going to hello everybody and welcome to our final discussion of the first day of Africa Textile Talks, a farm to fashion strategy for a sustainable and fair future. And as many of you will know, the idea of a farm to fashion strategy and farm to fashion concept is very much in the conversation about sustainable fashion. But what we want to know what it really means, and what does it mean for producers, what does it mean for designers, what does it mean for retailers, and what does it mean for the fashion industry? So I'd really like to welcome our very experienced and informed panel. I'll start with Ayanda Bam, and I'm going to ask him to introduce himself. So we've got Ayanda, yeah, you go off and then I'll introduce the rest of the people. So just very briefly, please just introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you very much for that, Jackie. I'm Ayanda Bam. I'm the CEO of Zageta. We're a cannabis advisory company working in industrial hemp. I'm also the founder of Friends of Hemp South Africa, the national association for the commodity, and serve as the private sector lead for the National Cannabis Master Plan.
Great, thank you very much. Next, Natasja Ambrosio, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Natasja Ambrosio, and I head up sustainability for Mr. Price Group. I also am the director and the founder of the Mr. Price Foundation, which was established in 2005. And yeah, I work with all the trading divisions of Mr. Price Group, which there is 7 of them now. And my role is really to coordinate a cross-divisional change process to integrate sustainability thinking and measurement into the business and its value chain, by the way.
Thank you. And Bruce Robertson, would you mind introducing yourself? And thank you for being here.
I'm Bruce Robertson. I'm the founder and CEO of Gulu Agricultural Development Company, and also the chairperson of the Uganda Ginners and Cotton Exporters Association. So I've been involved in cotton ginning, or operating and owning cotton gins in Uganda since 1995. And GADC, Gulu Agricultural Development Company, is involved in northern Uganda. We have 3 cotton ginneries in 3 different parts of northern Uganda, and we buy cotton, mainly organic cotton, but also conventional cotton from farmers in Uganda, all the way across northern Uganda, from the Congo border through to the Kenyan border, all along the South Sudanese border. We, as the Uganda Ginners Association, we work with 300,000 farmers across the country. And they're all smallholder farmers, all subsistence farmers. There's no commercial cotton farming in Uganda. So it has a big developmental impact on the poorest areas of the country.
Thanks. And Lilitha Mahlati, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lilitha Mahlati, and I am co-founder and managing director of Ivili Loboya. We are a manufacturing plant. We source wools and cashmere from farmers, and we process it through various stages of the value chain. We then have various different clients as well, but mainly around the sort of scouring and carding services. And then also the knitting business. We have a knitting and weaving business as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Great, thank you very much. So there's quite a varied representation here from different parts of the value chain and different fibers, which is fantastic. So I'm going to start with you, Ayanda, because you working in a field with a fiber that and an industry that doesn't exist yet, which is really interesting. So I want to start off with you because I think hemp is really as a kind of we don't have the industry here. We have cannabis plants growing in South Africa. But what are you trying to do, and why are you trying to do it in South Africa? And what does it mean for this farm to fashion strategy that we're talking about in this panel?
Thank you for that, Jackie. Well, I think the cannabis plant is particularly interesting in South Africa in general because it is seen as a sort of avenue for being able to access a number of different avenues for revitalizing the sort of industrialization that needs to happen in South Africa quite urgently. I think it also accelerated by the disaster that has been sort of the COVID pandemic. But I think really broadly, what's exciting about cannabis is it's sort of an old crop with sort of novel applications. It's, you know, one of the oldest and most widely adapted plants in the world. And in South Africa, there's actually an ancient provenance of actually growing this and converting it into a number of different products, including, interestingly enough, with textiles applications. In a general sense, I think for the economy, the plant is interesting on a number of levels. It has huge ability to create large numbers of jobs. We're talking about 3 people hired per hectare just on the farming side. Never mind all of the downstream opportunities that come out of hemp, where you have probably more applications out of this one plant than potentially any other plant on the planet. It has, I think what's particularly interesting for this conversation is that hemp is a very interesting plant because it has very high carbon sequestration potential when you're actually growing it. We're talking about the ability to absorb up to 16 tons of CO2 equivalent for every hectare, while providing you a very large biomass to use compared to other fibers and other plants, and providing farmers the resilience, which comes from the ability to actually put every single part of that plant to some sort of use or sort of commercial marketing. So it provides quite a number of different opportunities as something that can be done in our agri-climate. Of course, as you say, it's sort of at quite a nascent stage. However, there are some capabilities that have been established and various companies, including Ivili, that has actually worked with hemp previously. The major challenge was with the prohibition on the plant, we weren't actually able to localize that supply chain. And so if you prohibited folks, farmers from being able to grow this, there was no way of being able to actually source this sustainably. And so the investment that then would have been made, for example, in the processing and the manufacturing capabilities have also, of course, then not followed because of the inability to source that supply locally. But it is a phenomenal crop, I think, in quite a number of ways. And in terms of why it's so exciting, I think, in the fashion space, is because, as I think most folks know, the fashion industry is one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. And I think there's quite a big focus on thinking about how we also start to reduce the carbon footprint along the entire value chain. So with looking at different kinds of fibrous crops, including hemp, you have the ability of doing that, as I was talking about, at the farm level. But also as you look to have a fiber that has a number of strengths compared to a number of other crops, it uses far less water than many other crops. It doesn't use any pesticides. It actually helps to revitalize soils and can be used for intercropping or crop rotation purposes. But it's also the kind of fabric, for example, that you don't wear out, which is also what contributes to a high degree of wastage, but you actually wear it in, it actually feels softer. The longer that you actually wear it, it's more breathable. It has a higher tensile strength. It has various antimicrobial properties, and it can be applied for various kinds of both woven textiles in the clothing and upholstery side, but also for the non-woven textile sector, where it already is being used in probably ways that people don't know, in cars that they drive and in some clothes that they wear. So we think it's a phenomenally relevant crop, and it's high time that we sort of bring it into the 21st century and provide some kind of breathing room in the enabling environment where the government can allow for this to really be liberalized, but I think also on the demand side to sort of stimulate the usage of this, because it is something that I think can contribute to reducing massively the kind of carbon footprint we have in the fashion industry.
Thanks very much for that. I think one wants to wonder why we don't all wear hemp and why anything else ever happened. But that's, I know, a long, difficult and complex history to that. Natasja, I want to go over to you because I think what you're going to tell us is going to be very interesting off the back of Ayanda's project, is that you've been pivotal to the development of the South African cotton growing industry. And what has it taken and what does it take to do that, to invest and to develop a sector, an agricultural sector that then feeds into the fashion industry? And what is your experience of that in South Africa?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so I think it's the most unusual thing for a retailer to get involved at a farm level. So our experience, I mean, firstly, when we started asking questions in 2013 about whether it's possible to sell products to our South African customers that are completely beneficiated from farm to store within South Africa. I mean, this is a question that we asked, and we did not know necessarily how this was going to happen or whether this was even possible. And we realized that when we actually went up to meet some cotton farmers up at Josini Dam, when we arrived, there was suddenly an entourage of people that we didn't know how they even knew we were going there. But that opened our eyes to see the value of a retailer asking these questions, because for the first time, you know, we definitely manage the demand. We know exactly what consumers want. That's the role that we play. And I think we misunderstood or certainly did not realize the value that we can add in the entire value chain, and certainly at a farming level. So for us, it was, I think it was unusual to do this. We knew very little about what was happening upstream. And certainly what this unlocked, I mean, was a whole journey of what has now been over almost 6 years of learnings and challenges, certainly, that we've experienced. But for us, when we understood what it could do in all different levels of the value chain, and it really just started with a question around, could our products have South African cotton in it? And we understood what that could do from a socioeconomic perspective, from a business risk perspective, from a sustainability in terms of environmental elements. Can we influence a different way of cotton farming? That was really all the questions that we asked right in the beginning.
We can ask you a bit later, but I'd like to hear what the results of that and what the outcome of that is, but we can get to that later, because I want to hear from Bruce, who, as you've described in your intro, you've been working since the 90s with farmers in Uganda. And what is your experience of taking the organic fibres that you grow? And I want to focus on the organic because we don't do organic in South Africa, but I just want to focus on your experience of the organic cotton farming and what your market and where you take it to market and what that means for, as you said, the smallholder farmers in South Africa and smallholder farmers in Uganda, in terms of that value chain, from the one end to the next end. If you can just briefly tell us that, not briefly, you can tell us in detail and get us excited about it.
Yeah, so we involved right at the front end or the back end, whichever you want to call it, of cotton. So we work with farmers on a very large scale in terms of numbers of farmers, and we buy it. We buy it from them through, at their farm gate through an extensive network of buying agents, and we gin it, which is basically removing the lint from the seed. And we export that lint to Europe, and we export it to Europe. We tried back in 2007 when the South African retailers got all excited about about organic cotton and sustainability. We exported some organic cotton from Uganda to the Frame Group to then sell through to the Woolworths Group, and what our experience of South African retailers, and I don't think it's any different to retailers elsewhere in the world, is that they want to tell the story about all the good stuff happening on the ground and how farmers are being looked after, etc. but they want to buy very cheaply at the same time. And those two, they don't really go together. So it's for me, it's a sort of a fundamental problem that when cotton, if you take a t-shirt, the actual value of cotton in a t-shirt is about, it was 4%. It's probably, the cotton price has gone up. It's now probably about 6%. So if you buy a t-shirt off the shelf at Woolworths or Mr. Price or wherever, 6% of the value of that t-shirt represents the entire material value of that item. And that's not the farm value of the cotton. That's the ginned value, so the raw lint. That's after we bought it from the farmer, we've ginned it and we've turned it into raw lint. So the sort of farming and ginning, I guess, objection to the whole value chain is that we get very little of it, and yet that's where the employment is, and that's where the impact is. So there's a sort of there's certainly a disjuncture and a disingenuousness about the lovely stories that we see in the ads compared to what happens in reality in terms of value going to where it really matters in our view. And we talk about the South African cotton industry. I used to be involved in it back in the 90s and up to about 2007, 2008. And we talk about farm to fashion. There was farm to fashion. I mean, South Africa had a very, very vibrant cotton industry from farm to the shelves. If you think, when I was operating, the Frame Group, Standerton Milling, Prilla, SPH in Cape Town, the crowd in George, whose name escapes me, there were about 7 or 8 spinning mills, all of whom were then feeding into weaving, knitting, and then dyeing, cut, make, and trim, etc. Only one spinning mill remains, and that's Prilla, and it's on its last legs. Why is that? In my view, it's because the retailers have too much power in the structure, and they basically wiped out the cotton industry by importing. So if you look at, for example, at Mr. Price, if you look at the history and where their cotton, where their clothing came from during their ascendancy, it came from China. And so basically, all credit to them, because that was good for their bottom line. But the imports from China from about 2002 to 2010 killed the South African cotton industry and costed hundreds of thousands of jobs. And I feel a little bit sort of, miffed when I hear about, our interest in farmers and cotton and development and impact and all of that, because it's the retailers that wiped it out in the first place.
I'm going to give Natasja a chance to respond to that immediately, just because you mentioned Mr. Price there quite often in your answer. So Lilitha, just hang on a sec. Natasja, I think it's very interesting because, I mean, obviously, when we understand there's a complex, complex set of issues here, but I'd love you to just respond to that, and how, I mean, you've obviously been involved in trying to address that, but just in response to Bruce's comments there.
Sure, Shane, thanks, Jackie. So yeah, I mean, firstly, maybe just to respond in terms of the actual price, and the point that Bruce was making around the cotton farmers really not getting a large portion of the value. That was one of the first things that we wanted to do differently. So in all the years that we've procured, in fact, we don't even negotiate. We request the price matrix from the ginnery that we buy from, and we don't negotiate the price point. We literally buy the lint that the farmers want us to pay, and then we facilitate it through. So we've never, ever, in all the time that we've been involved with South African cotton at that level, did we actually change the price point. The farmers come to us, they say this is our price matrix, and we feel comfortable that this covers our cost and it provides enough profit for us, and that's basically the price point that we take, and then we facilitate it through the value chain. So I think that's something we did very differently, and that seemed to have worked. The other thing that we've also done is we've understood that there's a lot of challenges, particularly in South Africa. I don't know about other countries, but in terms of small-scale farmers, to be able to afford the input costs, it's a real problem. They don't have title deeds for the land. They work on communal land, can't access any finance from anybody. And really, this has become a huge problem for them to sustain their farming. So we've gotten involved in actually, again, a very unusual thing for us to do and a high risk, but it certainly showed us the wealth that we can unlock is by providing that input finance for those small scale farmers and then committing to buy the cotton. The only requirement was that it had to fit within the grade of what we were looking for. Obviously, there's a specific grade and spec that we need for the products that we make in South Africa, and that was the only requirement. And that was unbelievable, because when we started measuring the wealth that unlocked, particularly with the farming cooperatives in Nkomazi areas, it was really phenomenal to see what happens when you actually do that. Now, so those are the two things. And I think the other thing, just maybe to respond around the value chain itself, I think, I mean, around about 2017, a number of retailers got together, and I was fortunate to be part of that group where we sat around the table and said, something's got to change. I think retail stood and recognized to the industry, to government, and to everyone, the fact that we were part of the problem. So the problem that Bruce has described in terms of the history of imports and the global value chains, it is what global value chains became. Retailers sourced from all over the world, from various different countries, and it had significant impacts for local production. And I think South African retailers stood together in 2017, 2018, and we said something's got to change. We want to be part of that change. And that was the birth of the Retail Master Plan. And now we sit on a weekly basis discussing how we can contribute. Significant commitments have been made to localization. Just our production in Africa alone exceeds what we import. Just in Africa alone, it's the majority of our procurement. In some of our businesses, is up to 75% that is locally procured. So I think there's been a massive shift, and yes, retail has to stand in its shoes and acknowledge that it was part of the decisions that we made in the past that actually impacted the industry significantly. And I think now the good thing is that we're all standing together, and there's discussions with everyone from spinning to textile molds to footwear industry to furniture industry. We're involved in almost every master plan that relates to our product, to try and shift that production back to South Africa. So we're committed. We want to see the change. Yes, there's a lot of challenges that we need to address, huge challenges, but I think we're at the table. We want to be part of the solution.
And I think we've also seen that with TFG. I mean, TFG's kind of localization and all the success stories we've seen there in the newspaper recently is also testament to that work with around the master plan. So it is interesting. And then Lilitha, I think let's come to you, because I think what you're doing is really brave and courageous and bold, taking on a factory in Butterworth and producing fibres and buying, I just explain what made you do that. I know it wasn't you alone, and how's it going? And I think, with the hemp industry, obviously that's what you're going to want to see, a lot of organizations like Lilitha's emerging and developing hemp fibers around the country, creating jobs. So I'd also like to hear, Lilitha, what impact you've had on the community around the factory. So just give us, context around the birth of Ivili, how it's going, how it emerged, and then also, how it's going and what that impact on the community is. I'd love to, tell us about that.
Sure. Yeah, so we are 7 years old now, but we actually that's just the commercial aspect of our business. But, the concept started quite a long time ago. Ivili was started by my mother and myself. She was quite a big player in the agricultural, market or space in South Africa. And she actually did her PhD in how to sort of mainstream rural industry, or rural players, and that's part of the reason why we are based in the rural area in Butterworth. She did her thesis on the marula industry and looked at marula farmers and where they are in the chain and how prevalent they are in the chain, and focused on a particular alcoholic drink that uses marula. So that was sort of and that coupled with a lot of experience around rural industries, and just Eastern Cape in general, and us being from the Eastern Cape as well. So quite a big passion of hers, and obviously she was the initial large driver around the business. My background is in financial services and private equity and businesses, adding value to businesses, growing businesses, and so we came together and formed Ivili. And why the wool industry and why cashmere industry as well. So from the wool front, a lot of what we're experiencing, or what we've experienced in our industry, really mirrors what Bruce has discussed, and Ayanda as well, in that the history of wool, quite some time ago, there was a bit of production around wool, but then that all dwindled to almost nothing, where wool in South Africa is, almost all of it is exported in a raw, greasy form. So no sort of value added to the product, we produce such large amounts of it and very good qualities that are sought after, globally. And so it was about beneficiating this product, wool, and revitalizing that industry. We're based in Butterworth, which is a rural part of Eastern Cape, but it used to be a hub around, textiles. And so ours was a project together with various different parties to try and sort of revitalize that space, and see, just bring it back to sort of glory days, so to speak. It hasn't been easy at all, as you can imagine, but we've actually done quite well, just with all the constraints that we've had. So that was on the wool side. On the cashmere side, we partnered with CSIR. CSIR had embarked on a research project, and quite a lengthy project, to determine whether the goats in South Africa, and particularly in the Eastern Cape, produced cashmere at a quality that would be, match qualities of cashmere in other parts of the world, like, Asia, for instance. And so that was a very successful project. And so, we sort of partnered together on that, where CSIR coming with most of the R&D work, and then Ivili was really the commercialization, or the birth of the commercialization of this research project. And so putting all that together, we sourced machinery, and we bought some machinery. We had some donated. It's really a bit of a mismatch of machinery. Raised money for some as well, and put that into our factory, which is about 4,000, almost 7,000 square meters in terms of the land, in Butterworth. And we then embarked on, the journey of actual production, of sourcing the raw material, all sorts of wool grades. Obviously it's very, the market is very good in terms, very, very well established. And so the classification of wools, etc., quite important. and then taking, trying to take them through the various stages of our chain. But another key thing is that we focused on sort of low quality wools as well. And low quality wools produce lots of different types of products, but very, because merino wool is sort of the key wool type in this in the country, and most of that is what is exported. A lot of some of these lower quality wools aren't actually sort of harvested as much, but there's a lot of value that could come out of them that could produce various different products. And so ours was to also really sort of take that on, so that together with sort of embarking on the cashmere project and really trying to work with the farmers in sourcing some of the wools that have no value or historically had no value, was really where we started. And so there was a lot of training around the cashmere, because obviously it's a new source of income for a lot of the goat farmers, and a new product and innovation. And so there was that. And then there was also, trying to source from a already existing wool market, but looking for products that aren't necessarily what everyone is supplying at the time. So so that was the key from that perspective. And when you're going back to your other question around community, very big on training and working with our farmers so that we can secure our supply. And then the other thing is the sorry. Okay, sorry. Then the other, so working on the supply, and then the other one, the key aspect of it is the employment, right? So we're in the rural area. There's a lot of unemployment. It's incredible. I mean, every time I'm around the factory, we have literally queues of people who are there trying to ask for a job. And so ours was also to try and create so much more opportunity in a place that really doesn't have a lot of an economy around it. And this goes across from really the beginning aspects in terms of the core factory work, but also all the way down to our knitting studio, where we have, the ladies who are there and they're knitting the products. They are, we have students from Walter Sisulu University, which is right there, and they come and they're designing some of our products. So we've created a little bit of an ecosystem around our factory and around the community of Butterworth in particular, but Eastern Cape as a whole. And so, we're also there sort of encouraging other co-ops around cashmere, where they haven't existed, or really working with the current co-ops that exist around the wool, and then also on the fashion side as well, the ladies who do our embroidery, our there's so many different things, so people that we work with in our community, that they add value to our business, and we just want to make sure that they're recognized and all of that. And so our products then also, they range from the very industrial type products, where it could just be an input into another manufacturer's chain, and then we also do knitting for designers and other textiles manufacturers, and then we also have our own lines as well. So yeah, that's just in a nutshell.
Wow, it's amazing. Thank you. I'm going to jump to Ayanda, because I'd like to hear what do you imagine for the hemp industry in South Africa? Something like we've heard from Lilitha, or something that Natasja does on a sort of big, large scale retail or how do you, especially in the beginning years. And then at some stage, I'd like to ask you what investments are needed to create this hemp industry, because I'm sure that there isn't an existing infrastructure for the hemp industry, or am I wrong? Anyway, but first answer that first part. I'm very interested to see how you imagine this hemp industry in South Africa.
So I think it's not sort of I suppose the question is not to sort of create a false distinction between the two, because I think both can exist. But I think the Ivili model is one that's actually really phenomenal, actually. And you see the investment that has been made over the last 2 decades in ensuring that you are truly kind of localizing and establishing the capabilities to have sort of anchor companies that are bred from here and that are creating sort of these multiplier opportunities, not just through the job creation that happens, but also in sort of cultivating or generating the creation of other enterprises. So that's something that's really important. I think what we would like to be able to see, and this is obviously quite a grand ambition because the investment that needs to be made towards this is huge. But if I'm looking 10, 15 years down the line, I'm seeing the ability of actually localizing the entire chain here, where you have a large proportion of the supply actually coming from rurally based, mostly Black farmers who are looking for opportunities to be able to participate in some sort of economic activity, where of course this is sort of a major imperative in general. But I think where you're also starting to stimulate the demand side, where the retailers themselves are starting to engage with their manufacturers and talking about why it's important to be able to actually source these types of fabrics, how that contributes to the broader just transition with the inclusion of farmers, but also playing a role in also shaping the shape of the demand, if you like, from the consumer side. Because, for example, to be able to kind of get the adoption, consumers need to be able to understand why, for example, it's much better to have organic cotton, right? If we are really concerned about the environment versus not. And it's important for them to help us sort of stimulate that kind of demand. But I think to your question around sort of where the investment needs to happen, I think government needs to play a role in liberalizing in general. So the idea that, for example, folks who want to grow fibers, hemp for fibers, need to even apply for a permit seems a little bit ridiculous if there's no possibility of ingesting this product anyway. The second thing is, I think the government needs to play a role in actually compacting between these various actors. So, if there is, let's say, some guarantee of offtake from a retailer that says, yes, they're willing to actually pay the additional cost for localizing, because of course it's going to take time to sort of build up, but are invested in also sort of backward investment, right? And some re-engineering where they can say to other manufacturers, you come in, you provide the support to decorticate the stuff or to do the scutching and hackling and the degumming and bringing some kind of spinning capability here. If that market is actually guaranteed, then it's much easier to sort of see how you can backward integrate. And that has major implications for job creation, for unbelievable innovation. I also think that because hemp has also other broad applications, we also want to kind of see the kind of innovation that even companies like Ivili are doing, who are looking at the application of fibers to even non-clothing and apparel that can be used in a number of other industries that helps to sort of greenify industrial production, whether that's in building materials or in insulation or in automotive composites. It plays a major, major role. And I would like for us, for example, to be having a conversation in 10 years' time where some of us are wearing hemp clothing, right, and can talk about it intelligibly, versus the kind of conversations that I'm having to have now, where it's really just about, well, does it have THC or CBD? And it's like, well, it's not really relevant. You're never gonna, you're gonna chop the stuff off before the flowers even grow. So we'd like to see a sort of a model that starts really very localized from the smallholder farmer in South Africa who desperately needs this, and then working our way absolutely downstream through the various chains and creating opportunities for that innovation to happen. So I think it's really, Jackie, a thing about bringing the bits and pieces together rather than sort of seeing them as a way of kind of cannibalizing one another. I think there's a way of actually growing the pie a little bit bigger, but the ways in which we compact are very important. And I think there isn't that great facilitator to do that between sort of the retailers, the producers, really dealing with Bruce's issues around, you know, what is the actual value that farmers are actually able to get out of this. In hemp, we're also imagining a world in which you can derive an alternative revenue stream by selling carbon credits, right? And offsetting or displacing emissions in some places or sequestering in others, which would be massively transformative, not just to the environment, but also to the economic livelihoods of those people who grow. So that's the vision that we have. But I think above all, I'm a patriot, you know. I'm very much about, you know, let's build stuff that's really heavily localized, even if there's an additional cost, because what we start to do is hedge for the future. We future-proof ourselves. We've seen what disruptions to global supply chains can do just over the last couple of years. I mean, even now trying to move product right through our ports, which are massively inefficient, has been a major constraint to every imaginable sector. So how do we think about what a truly South African industry looks like, one that actually embodies the characters of our provenance, right? Where we assume some of the centrality of our heritage in the way that we market and monetize and use these kinds of products. So that's sort of our broad vision, and I'll stop there. But I think maybe let me just say, because I think oftentimes we in the hemp side are sort of pitted against some of the cotton guys, right? And I think there's often sort of this idea that there needs to be sort of the conflict. I think some competitive tension is very important, obviously, but I think there's there's enough room in the world for both of us to be able to exist. Even blends of cotton and hemp that are absolutely fantastic, and that many folks and even very big designers have integrated into their lines. So I see a much bigger world rather than a smaller world in which we're all fighting for infinitely smaller pieces.
Very exciting. I'm not going to go to you now, Bruce. I just want to go to Natasja quickly. Natasja, just in terms of, I love the idea, love the idea of the pie getting bigger, because I think that is what's happening, because the pie got so tiny with globalization and offshoring. Now we're seeing the localization and the pie growing bigger. But I would just want to ask you to just trying to make that localization work. And I mean, I live with an economist who's got lots of questions around localization, but I'm a localizer. So I'm very interested in how you do that and what it takes, and how can we do more of it, and how can we make that supply chain and address Bruce's problem, is how do we make a more sustainable, I mean, I know that South African cotton is BCI, but it's all BT cotton, and we have environmental issues with that, but how do we unlock all this potential that we clearly have in a country that is a fertile country? It's water scarce, but it's a very fertile country. We have lots of people needing work.
So maybe I can just start with just the approach that we've taken, and I think I speak for pretty much all the master plan signatories, not just Mr. Price Group, is what are, I mean, I guess the low-hanging fruits. What are the things that we could do right now? And what became very evident for us was that there's actually quite a lot of knitting capability in the South African value chain. So if I just look at cotton, we very comfortably could produce large volumes of our products from farm to store in terms of a knit product. So t-shirts, we've also been able to do that with towels. But then in terms of your kind of wovens, your wide width sheeting and duvets, that's been very difficult because we haven't been able to, and I know we had the capability and the capacity in our country, but that a lot of it largely doesn't exist anymore. It's very old technology. And so those are the more longer term kind of strategies that we're looking at as to how can that be done? What investment is it going to take? Who's the industrialist that will be able to do that? At the same time, as we're looking at where those kind of value chain opportunities are lying in terms of short and long term, we're also very mindful of the environmental impact. So you're absolutely right. If we look at cotton, what we discovered was that it's all GM cotton in South Africa, and that was the entire industry when by the time we got to the farming level. We then requested and certainly said that all retailers wanted to, at the very least, have a sustainable growing method. So we influenced and had discussions with Better Cotton to bring the Better Cotton standard into South Africa. That was done as a country deal, very much like Australia's done. And that was kind of like the first step for us to be able to at least improve some of the methods that was actually happening on the ground. So certainly, as you say, not the ideal, but certainly an improvement from where we were at. And then again, even with your dyeing and finishing processes, we know those are very concerning processes, and a lot of work is now being done by certain retailers, including ourselves, to look at better technology and working in partnership with those manufacturers to say what can be done, how can it be changed, and we're learning along the way ourselves. I mean, there's so much to learn, but I think how do we increase localization is definitely capability and capacity bottlenecks. There's no question about it. It's going to require quite a bit of investment. It's going to require industrialists. And if I look at just at spinning and textile production, we certainly don't have kind of young people putting up their hand going, we'll put up a plant and we'll produce, and it's just not there. So, and understandably so, the industry is really it's diminished significantly. And so we understand as retail, we will have to get involved. We will need to make some kind of commitments and potentially even put some money and investment behind that. So, and I think there's certainly a number of us retailers that are prepared to do that. There's a lot of, and just to one thing that Ayanda was saying as well in terms of the hemp industry, firstly, what I want to say is that retailers like diversity, by the way. So we don't mind. If we can get hemp products that are looking good and our customers want it, we'd be very happy to sell them. And I think what we did do on the cotton side, it was about 2 years ago, we did a study to look at how can we make it a viable value chain. So we looked at where some of the pressure points were, and we did some economic modeling to look at how can you shift, what are the things that you can change that actually can make it viable to produce at scale again in South Africa. So I think it's a lot of various different things depending on what the challenges are at which point of the value chain. But certainly the discussions with the master plan, we've all made commitments to localize more production. We understand, and just to the point around regionalization, it is the shift that's taking place at a rapid rate. I mean, and it started happening pre-COVID. We already started seeing retailers wanting to localize more, shortening their lead times. I think for the first time, really understanding what is required as an emerging market multinational. Our business definitely understands what it means for our country and for our region to localize. So there's a concerted effort to unlock that. We understand what it will do for our market, for the people in our country, to unlock jobs, to unlock wealth. So, but there's certainly a lot of challenges in making that happen. And but I think we have to do business cases. We have to, in order to get the investment, we will have to make sure that the business case works and that there's commercial viability and that we can get the volume. So particularly with retail, if we want to go back to producing lots of textiles in the country, we have to commit the volumes behind it, because you cannot make that kind of investment in a textile plant. And I think it will be the same for hemp, Ayanda, is that if we want to do this properly, we have to commit the scale. And I look forward to seeing how we can explore even different types of raw materials, natural materials, again, in terms of value chain. One of the discussions we're involved in right now is also with SAPI around localizing some of our viscose. It's unbelievable that our pulp just gets exported in raw form. So for us, it really is, it's a long journey, we know that, and a lot that needs to happen. But I think the excitement is there, and it's really just to leverage the commitments that have already been made. And I'd love to see young people just getting involved again in the industry and being excited about what's possible. And I do believe that a lot of the innovation that we see coming through is actually coming from young people that are actually saying, we want to try the new technology with better environmental methods, and can we take out the water that's used in dyeing and finishing? Can we change the way that energy is used? And that's very exciting for us. So yeah, so I think a lot needs to happen, but it is really about taking hands and working together. There's no ways we're going to fix this problem one part of the industry by itself. And I think the fragmentation that we've seen in the past was really part of the problem. Everyone was working in these silos, and that caused a huge problem.
Sure. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's also interesting that there's so much hope and potential that we see and in this industry, and hope and expect. I mean, and hopefully it delivers, because there's a lot at stake, I think, in South Africa especially. So Bruce, back to you. Sorry, you, I'm really interested in your, I mean, cotton is such a big issue and such a topical issue everywhere around the world. I mean, I follow lots of groups and discussions. Can you just tell us about, like, what are the big issues around cotton and sustainability, and what is your experience of growing cotton organically, and what does it mean for the earth and the soil really, and your market? I mean, I think your market is mostly European, if that's right. So over to you, Bruce.
Thanks. So just briefly on what Natasja was saying earlier. I mean, I think if you look at the South African cotton industry, we've got the cotton, we produce excess raw cotton. So the farming side of it's thriving in a sense. My sense is that we've got plenty of knitting capacity, cut, make and trim, fashion, that's all thriving. There's a bottleneck in the middle, and it's mainly around spinning, because that's the sort of big investment, and it's like the unsexy investment. And there's you know, as Natasja pointed out, there's no one on their own putting up their hand now, because I guess if they look at the recent history, it's not very appealing. But I would have thought that it's, you know, it's big investment, but it's not big in terms of the South African retail size of operation. And I would have thought that cotton cluster that's working at the moment, which I believe from the producer side as well as from the retailer side is working very constructively and taken out the silos that were operating when I was there a couple of decades ago. That cotton cluster would be able to get together and say, let's put up a spinning mill, and the economies of scale of these things are such that you probably only need one, and make it state of the art, and you know, all sort of invest in it, because and do some form of toll spinning, because it's so easily quantifiable. It's you know, the costs are so transparent, and if you did that, I think it would open up a huge, you know, it'd make farming much more attractive, because as a farmer, you always want to sell locally first before you look at export. Without yarn, you've got nothing upstream. If you've got yarn easily available at reasonable prices locally, it opens up all the different avenues of upstream cotton production, and that's where the real labor-intensive stuff is. Anyway, that's my tuppence worth on the South African industry. In terms of organic cotton, you know, we've been doing it for 15 years. We do it, you know, all in Uganda, and we export it all to Europe. And the reason for that is there's no BT, and there's no GM anywhere in Uganda of any crop. So something can't be organic if it's genetically modified. That's across the spectrum of any product. So trying to do organic cotton or any other product in a country where there's a lot of genetically modified organisms is very difficult. The certification becomes a nightmare. Secondly, in Uganda, there's a viable peasant agriculture. So 85% of the Ugandan population are farmers. So it's not like South Africa, where the rural farming population was basically smashed by the poll tax, the migrant labor system, and apartheid. And what you've got left are very small remnants of, very difficult conditions in marginal areas. And so viable peasant agriculture, to build a business out of a peasant agriculture base like we have in Uganda, South Africa is not really is pretty much a non-starter for us. We tried to, as I said earlier, we got all excited in 2007. The Woolworths Group went on this big sort of environmental drive. Said, their sort of like catchphrase was Plan A, which is the whole environmental responsibility number, because there is no Plan B. Well, when the global financial crisis hit, and so we exported 245 tons of Ugandan organic cotton to Frame. They made it into, they got organic certification in their mill in Pinetown. They sent it to Woolworths, and this was going to be our future. While the global financial crisis hit, and that Plan A went out the window. It's got shelved, and it was back down to, prices. Price is the only thing that counts. So we lost faith in the South African sort of organic, sustainable markets. And to be honest, I don't think that's. I think if you're a producer, certainly in textiles, which is a mass-based thing, it's not like 53 jars of marmalade that you sell at the local fete. The economies of scale, certainly in raw cotton production and ginning, is such that you're producing thousands of tons. Even as a small producer, you're producing thousands of tons of raw cotton, which produces millions of t-shirts. If you are doing that, you can't be looking at, organic and sustainable market into South Africa, because the market's simply too small. The numbers of consumers in South Africa that are prepared to pay the price premiums that are required to produce those products are too small for any sort of sustainable business. So I think, ironically, if I can talk about my Ugandan business, but I'm sure people are more interested in South Africa and what one could do here. Ironically, if you're looking at some form of sustainable textiles here on any sort of scale, you should be looking at doing all the production here, and then at the export market for the organic or fair trade or whatever it is product into Europe and the US, because that's where the consumers are that are willing to pay the price that you need for this. To produce cotton organically is just, you are going to get generally lower yields, certainly lower than commercial production. So, if you're sitting in Groblersdal on an irrigated cotton farm, and you've got BT cotton, and you're spraying 5 times, even though you've got BT cotton, you're still spraying 5 times, you're spraying herbicides. It's highly efficient, and you're getting incredible yields, but you are murdering the environment. I mean, cotton uses 26% of the world's pesticides are used on cotton. So it's murderous for the environment, but it's highly efficient. And cotton farmers are almost sort of forced into that situation because because of the race to the bottom in terms of the price that the retailers and the textile mills are prepared to pay for the raw cotton. In a place like Uganda, there's an opportunity, because you're dealing 100% with smallholder farmers, and you're dealing with cotton fields that are 1/2 acre, 1 acre, and then surrounded by open land or bush. There's much more opportunity for the what we call the predators, which are in this case good, which are ladybirds, black ants, etc., that eat the cotton pests. There's much more opportunity for those to thrive because they aren't obliterated by commercial farming in the surrounding areas. And the soils haven't been obliterated. The soils are naturally, rich in organic matter and nutrients because they haven't been, haven't had nitrogen fertilizer applied to them over the last 40 years. So there's much more. It's a much more sort of viable, peasant or smallholder crop as well as organic crops. So that's that's how we can operate there. And I've given the reasons why we operate into Europe.
Thanks. That's so interesting. I'm going to put you on the spot, Lilitha, because I want you to have the last word. But the question I want to ask, and it's something that it's not on our prep work, but then it's something that's come through all the conversations we've had today, and it's the consumer. It's the idea. I mean, you've all mentioned it already. It's like what we're talking about price and we're talking about demand, and at the end of the day, we've got a climate crisis that's looming. And I mean, as Bruce and Natasja have seen it, who both live in Durban, it's a reality already. So how do we address this very urgent need to be more responsible about what we wear, because then we'll have more responsible production and growing? What is it that will, and I mean, we always have to consider that we, in a very difficult context in South Africa, where we have a lot of people who don't have lots of money, and if they spend more on clothes, they're going to spend less on food. But what do we do to address this issue around the consumer? What is it going to take for the consumer to be demanding cotton, organic cotton and hemp from Natasja's Mr. Price? What do you think from your perspective, and what would it take? And I think that will have to be the last, because we're on 7, but yeah, you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's a loaded one, because there's so many, things you could say towards that, and we haven't really done a very good job, to be honest, of around the consumer. But I think it goes back to, the players that Bruce was alluding to earlier around, how we got here, and the retailers and their influence on all of this. They're also, they'll probably have a lot of influence in terms of changing the consumer, psyche around this as well. It's what they, where they go, and the access that the consumer has, and where they buy the product is usually with the retailer. So that's a huge point, a place that I feel a lot of the responsibility lies there. But it's also to say that there are ways to make it that it doesn't have to be that expensive. From my perspective, in the wool industry, and from what we're seeing and what we're doing, we are finding ways to actually, as much as possible, make sure that the cost, for just really for our survival as a business, to make sure that the localization story, persists, continues, but also just for the industry as a whole, for the global market as a whole, around sustainability and around purchasing these products. For us, it's quite important as well that we try and find ways to reduce costs, and to also make sure that players like, our off-taker, say a retailer, they take on some of those the cost burden a little bit in the beginning, to make sure that we can scale to a place where we can get to that cost place where it is then affordable as possible to the end consumer. So there are those, that's what we're trying to do on our side. But the message is really out there. We, at the end of the day, people are going to go with what they like, people are going to go with how much it costs. And then people are also going to go with, this whole story around impact and et cetera, to be honest, is quite niche still, even though it's sustainability is a mega trend, as where we are from a global perspective, but it's still a very niche thing that people are doing around the impact story. So we just have to keep sort of trying to get that as mainstream as possible. You need to, as far as possible, get our designers to use our products to make sure that they're sustainable as far as possible, to influence across, the whole chain and every part, create, keep the narrative going around what it is and what it means for our world, for our globe, and why products like wool and cotton and hemp and all of these others are the best for what we're facing in the future. And there was talk around youth as well. I mean, I'm youth, Ayanda's youth. There are people out here. I mean, we're punting this to our our communities as well. So you just, you can also try to start small in terms of what you're doing, but it's just that the narrative has to keep growing, and you just have to ensure that various players who then have that influence to ensure that the narrative then continues to scale and get to all corners, does so.
And I think we're seeing with our fashion designers, all our young, amazingly talented fashion designers, they're really driving the narrative of South African fashion. And I mean, I get so many questions around fabrics and availability and looking for stuff. And I think they're part of building that demand. The top end designers then come down and influence the consumers that the retailers are supplying. So I think we have to call it a day. I don't know if anybody wants to say something as a last word, or if you all want to have a last word, but it'll have to be very, very brief. Would you all like a last word? Bruce?
No, thanks. It's been very interesting. Thank you.
Natasja?
Yeah, this has been really good, and I think we need some more time. It's a good conversation and one we need to have more of. Just lastly, maybe just to say that we're certainly starting to see the consumer shifting. We are surprised by some of the things we just do, and they just support it. So I think we are starting to see a shift, which is good.
Yeah, that's great to see. Ayanda?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been a very stimulating discussion. I think somebody had just added here in the chat around what are some of the things that, for example, we can do, I think, as sort of responsible citizens to sort of lobby the government and to lobby for certain kinds of changes. So I think there's lots of opportunities. I've thrown something there in the chat, but really looking forward to more of these engagements. And thank you very much to Twyg for hosting it and inviting us.
Pleasure. Thank you, everybody. And thanks for giving your time late in the evening. And yeah, have a good evening further, and I'll be in touch.